glasses, right? Did anybody have any questions from last time? Usually they just look at me. I know that was almost a whole month ago, so expectations are low. So today what I want to talk about is kind of the imperial/colonial history. And people tend to think that that starts with the arrival of the Europeans in the 19th century. And I'm going to go with no. That's a big no on that. So it did not. It goes all the way back to any number of... Do I need to stand somewhere in particular?
Nope, you're doing good.
It goes all the way back to a number of other empires. That's, incidentally, that's Petra. That's just old and it's cool and everybody loves Petra. So if we go all the way back, even before the Romans, we have to think about one of the early invaders of what is today Palestine, Israel and the Palestinian territories. And that as the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and the southern kingdom that was Judah, what happened in the 6th century BCE is that Judah in the north was overrun by the Babylonians. A king named King Nebuchadnezzar, which I think is a name we all recognize. And he sent the most of, not all, but he sent most of those living in Jerusalem into exile in Babylon. So that's one of the earliest invasions that we have of this region that has been time and time again sort of overrun. A number of years later, Cyrus the Great, that great Persian, he comes back, or he invades Babylon, and he allows the Jewish community to return to Jerusalem. So they're back in Jerusalem, and they build the second temple. The first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, and and Cyrus, although he was a Zoroastrian by religion, he was very tolerant. He figured out that if you don't let people practice their religion and their culture, it makes them very angry. They get very tense. They want to rebel against you. And so he's like, okay, everybody it's fine. You pay your little tax, and it's all good. And what we know about the Persians, or what I think one of the most interesting things to me about the Persians, besides the vast expanse of their empire, you can see it there, that's about 500 BCE, they made Aramaic the official language of their empire. And Aramaic is the language of who? Jesus. I mean, not that Jesus couldn't speak anything he wanted, because he's Jesus, right? But the language that he spoke in Nazareth as a human is Aramaic. And so that in this sort of bow, I suppose, to the fact that there are lots of people all speaking different languages, they decided to make Aramaic the official language. And there are still small communities that speak Aramaic. I know. Right? And then we get the Romans. That's my daughter and two of my cousins. In 63 BCE, the Romans, on their, what's the word I want? On the way to world domination, right? Conquered Judea. And Trajan, I believe the emperor was Trajan, appointed Herod the Great as the king of Judea. And what do we know about Herod? Power. Herod was all about the power. Absolutely. And he wasn't unlike Pontius Pilate. He's going to murder his way right to the top of the food chain. And so under Herod, and later on, Judea, Samaria, and a region called Idumea became the Roman province of Judea, and perhaps our least favorite person in the region who is in charge of Jerusalem. Say it again.
Pontius Pilate?
Pontius Pilate, who we all learned last time was a really what? Bad guy. A really bad guy, right? I mean, you want the gospel to say, no, just saying it was a bad guy. And so now the Romans are in charge. So we've had, the Babylonians, and then we have the Persians, and now we have the Romans. If at any point you have a question, I'm speaking too fast, I'm not speaking fast enough. Just, yell at me. My students do. I don't see hands half the time, so just yell out at me. That's the Roman ruins actually at Tel Beit Shan, which if you go to Israel, go see the Roman ruins. They got the columns, the whole cool thing. They were toured out. That was the end of the day. You can see they're just like, we are done. In 70 CE, 70 AD, the Romans, in a fit of pique over the restiveness of the Jewish community, destroyed the second temple in the city of Jerusalem. So the Romans, they were done. They'd had it with them, and they destroyed Jerusalem. And so that all that remains today of the second temple is what? The Western Wall, the Holy of Holies. It's the only thing that's still there. And they destroyed the city. Well, a group of zealots decided we are not having it. And they escaped Jerusalem. In 72, they escaped to a place called Masada. And that's Masada right there. And if any of you have been there, you can take the tram. My group, when I took this picture, the group that I had with me at the time, they wanted to walk. So we got there at sunrise because they closed the path down at like 10 in the morning. So we got there at sunrise and we hiked what's called the Snake Path. And you hike all the way up to the top of Masada. And some members of our group took the tram. But there I was walking. I was way behind all the students you can imagine, Whose idea was this? But it's pretty true, and you get a really good set. It's right above the Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea, you actually almost start at the Dead Sea, and then you walk up to this hill that is Masada. And they created a community there, and they stayed there. And the Romans, in their desire to get this group of people, built ramparts off the back. So if you go to the top of Masada and you look down on the other side, you can see the ramps that the Romans built. And that the story goes, a lot of it is, legend. I have a very dear friend of mine who's a historian of Jewish history, and he contends that this story is not true. But, okay, so Steve and I, we have our moments. They were so upset that the Romans were coming for them that they committed suicide. They killed themselves. And the account of this event is in Josephus Flavius, the History of the Jews. Again, it's very much a part of the legendary or the mythical history, at any rate, of the Jewish people in this region. You can only imagine they all killed themselves. And even today, the IDF, new members of the Israeli Defense Force, when they commission, they go to the top of Masada and take their oath, whatever they say. I know, isn't that interesting? And so then in 132, the region is part of a greater province called Syria Palestina. So at least by now, by 132 CE, there have been a lot of people already, and we haven't even gotten to everybody else. So let's see what we've got.
How do people survive in that desert-looking area? What do they do for food and work?
It's mostly uninhabited. The area around Masada and the Dead Sea, people don't really live there. There are a couple of oases where people can live. And you can't go, I don't know if any of you, if you've done this, you can't go all the way to the Dead Sea without doing a float, right? You gotta do the float thing, you gotta float. Because the Dead Sea is so alkali that you don't have to do anything, you just bob along on the surface of the water.
Just your body, not in a boat?
No, just your body. I have a picture somewhere of me with a book. And I'm holding up a book and I'm bobbing along. Yeah, no, I'm serious. And then what a lot of people do is the mud is very good for you. It's good for your skin, right? So you put the mud on, and then you go float, and then you shower, and your skin is like as soft as a baby's behind. It's fantastic. And they sell it. They sell the mud. You can buy it in stores. Right? I brought some home once. Oh my God, my skin looked fantastic for a while. So yes, you do. You just bob.
Still does.
Oh, thank you, Father. And Father is way too kind. Thank you. Some days I really need to hear that. So what happened? So in the intervening, I guess, centuries, we could say, people in the region got along about as well as people get along, right? There's Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and they're kind of just living, sort of autonomously, whatever. Well, what happens in 1453? Does anybody know? That's a really obscure date. But what happens in 1453 that is another conquering power that attempts to unify the region? Enter the... Somebody say it again? Oh my God, do you want me to say about the Crusade? Do you want me to say anything about the Crusades? Do you want me to say anything about the Crusades? I can, I will.
Yes.
Do you? Okay. I intentionally left them out. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate that. Okay, so you're right. So then when we get to 1095, Pope Urban has a problem. And what is the Pope's problem? Does anybody know? It is not a problem with the Holy Land, actually. It's a problem with unruly knights who are for Christianity. Really, he needed something to do with these knights, right? So he told them, if you go on crusade, if you die on crusade, straight to heaven. Where have we heard that? And so they set off. They get initially to Constantinople. Well, actually, I should go back. There's the People's Crusade is first, right? And it's these peasants, I hate to say that, peasants with like hoes and pitchforks. You know, and they're marching to the Holy Land, and this just freaks out the Byzantine emperor, and he has them slaughtered. So then a more professional force comes along about 1096 or so, right? And they make a pact with the emperor, and he lets them go, and they go in, they conquer Jerusalem, and set up the Crusader kingdoms, of which the most important is Jerusalem. If you drive to Petra, there's an old Crusader castle at Ashabak. And you can tour it. And there's no OSHA. You know, Jordan doesn't have OSHA. So you can climb up and down and around. And my students ended up about 300 feet down in a cave somewhere. So they did this. So they set up these Crusader kingdoms. And this ushers in a series of about 7 crusades in all, where the only one that was successful was the one in 1099. All the rest of them were mostly failures. I think it was the 4th Crusade. There was a problem, and everybody went home except Richard the Lionheart, and he kept going. And it kind of culminates with this catastrophic event called the Children's Crusade. And it's a young boy who is convinced that the salvation of the Holy Land can only be gained by children. So he rounds up orphans and foundlings and children who basically have no family, and he marches them from Marseille. He marches them to Marseille, and they get on a boat and they travel, and many of them are enslaved, murdered, and that was the Children's Crusade, and that's the kind of the last big one. Later on, you know, kings will say, "Let's go on crusade." I mean, like, a great idea. But that's does that help, Catherine? Does anybody have any questions about that? There were like 7 or 8 of them. Mostly to fix Europe's internal problems. Because the simple truth of the matter is that nobody in the Holy Land was preventing Christians from going on pilgrimage. That's a myth. That's just not true. So, yeah, there you are. And you can see the remains. If you go to Caesarea, there's the Roman ruins at Caesarea. It's about 45 minutes from Tel Aviv. There's also Crusader ruins. So you can see them there as well. Big mural. Okay, anyway. So there we are. So then we had the Crusades, and that didn't go well for anyone. And then in 1453, the next major group, I would say, were the Ottomans. So the Ottoman Empire, a Turkish empire that arises about 100 years before that, they become the dominant power from about the 16th century to the 20th century. And they unite the entire, well, lots of places, but the entire Middle East is under Roman or Ottoman domination. So they keep the peace. They're hated. Nobody likes them. But they do keep the peace as great empires are sort of want to do. They made trading relationships with people. They, I don't know that they necessarily tried to be good neighbors, but, you know, there you are. So what happens to the region is that it becomes the locus of these competing nations of Europe who really are not terribly fond of the Ottoman Empire. Not the least of which are uncertainties over Russia. Russia is a problem. Oh, wait, I missed somebody. The Mongols also conquered the region.
So why is everybody interested in this region?
Okay, so part of it is that it's a pivot between East and West, right? So it's the Near East or Middle East, it sits here in the middle, right? And if you go east, you get China, Japan, Russia, etc. You go west, you get to Western Europe and beyond. So it's this pivot point. When we get to the British, there's going to be a whole other reason, but that's why, because geographically, and then for trade, right? Trade from like along the Silk Road comes west, and then the Mediterranean seaports like Gaza, like Beirut, any of places along the Levantine coast, get on boats and then they travel to Europe. So silk and spices and cool stuff, a lot of trade. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and it's the locus of going from east to west. And what happens with the Mongols is that the Mongols is called the Pax Mongolia. Yes, were they tough? Yes, the Mongols were tough, but they also created a safety net for traders and merchants because they kept the peace. How did they keep the peace? Through power. They were among stirrups for horses were invented in China, but the Mongols were the first to saddle a horse with stirrups and then be able to stand up and shoot arrows and wield swords by standing up. And yeah, they were fierce, really fierce. So yeah, how could I forget those poor Mongols? And the Russians were, I think it's a misnomer. I mean, they were sort of concerned, they claimed to be concerned about the Orthodox community in the Holy Land. So, and Russia was kind of always just a little bit of a concern for people. And, you can see it there, right? There they are, duking it out. That picture says so much about what was going on with the... Oh! Look at that map. Sorry. Who's missing from this story so far? There's three really important groups of people that are missing from the story. Christians?
The Russians?
Muslim? No. But who's missing from the story of invasion so far?
I thought you were looking at the picture.
Oh, no. This picture illustrates these competing powers, but who is not part of the story? The people that what?
That live there.
The people that live there. Nobody asked the people that live there, who would you like to conquer you? They would have said, well, nobody, thank you. Right? The people that live there are consistently not part of the story. And I find that so troubling. So, what happens is there it is. That's kind of in the run up to World War I. This is just a cool map. This shows you the competing powers in the region. Probably the bloodiest war for independence was fought in Algeria. But yeah, that's what it looked like. And the only place on that map that has local control is this region right here. It's controlled by the Sharif of Mecca. Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in Islam, are there. And it's also a great big what?
Desert.
that's gonna have a whole lot of wood. Somebody just said it. Oil.
What?
Oil. Oil. And that's at the very end here. But this shows you the zones of influence. I'm sorry, Mark. I will speak up. Speak up. So anyway, that's just a really cool map. Oh, the Italians, my people. Yeah, let me just say. My people, Libya, you can see how long that. We can't govern ourselves. We have no business trying to colonize other people. My gosh. So, and this shows you, I love this also, this shows you the long reach of British imperialism. So, the Habsburg Empire, Habsburg Austria, I'm sorry I'm reading this, but otherwise I'll get it wrong. They bordered the Ottoman Empire, so they didn't like to think of them expanding anymore. The furthest reach of the Ottoman Empire was almost Vienna. They tried at least twice, maybe 3 times, to conquer Vienna, and they never could. But that tells you how far the Ottoman Empire stretched. So if you're in that region and you're like Habsburg Austria, you're thinking, Vienna. No, and if you've ever been to Vienna, it's a great city. So, and then there's Britain. Britain has, if we go back to this map for just a second, let me do this. Britain has something really, really important by the mid-19th century. And what is that? That makes their travel time to India shorter and safer. Pardon?
The Navy.
They have a navy, a very powerful navy, and they have the, somebody said it.
Suez Canal.
The Suez Canal. So what happens is the building of the Suez Canal was funded largely by the British. In addition, in 1860 to 1863, during the United States Civil War, Egypt went even more massively into debt to Britain because of the cotton industry. And we turned our gaze of where we got our cotton away from the U.S. South, the antebellum South, to Egypt. And then when the Civil War ended, everybody started buying their cotton again from the U.S. South. And so Egypt found itself in a tremendous amount of debt to the British, which turns out to be a real problem for them. So Britain will do anything it can to keep control of the region because of the Suez Canal and its connections to India. At the inauguration of the Suez Canal, Giuseppe Verdi wrote an opera, Aida. And it was first performed at the opening of the Suez Canal. Aida. It's the Latinized Aisha. So now you know, if you like Giuseppe Verdi's Aida, now you know, that's why he wrote it. Act of imperialism, that's fantastic. France, interestingly enough, is feeling a little, France is not doing well with her colonies. So France's interest in the region is how can we regain some influence? And the answer comes in 1878 in the form of one of our very favorite people in history, Napoleon. Napoleon invades Egypt in 1798. He finds the Rosetta Stone, which is a translation of the hieroglyphs into 2 forms of Greek, which is how we translated them today. People that can read the hieroglyphs, that's how they learned to do it. Well, he stole it, only to have it stolen by the British, and now if you want to see it, you have to go to the British Museum. Because it's still there. And the Egyptians sort of keep asking for it back, and that would be really cool, and the British are like, no, people come from all over the world to see it in the museum. I know, it's kind of unfortunate. But it is a cool, it's a really cool stellar stone. So that's kind of France's, they just want to regain their colonial prestige. And in all of this, the 3 major competing powers become Britain, France, and Russia. Those are the three main competing powers as we get to the middle and to the end of the 19th century. There is another very important movement going on at this oh, there it is. And Britain and Russia, they carved up sphere. Oh, look, there's the map. There's Britain and France carving up the world. I mean, it's fantastic. It's bad, but it's fantastic. There is another force at work here in the latter part of the 19th century, and that is the rise of Zionism. And I'm going to say political Zionism. It had, as I think we mentioned in the very first talk I gave back in February, the persecution of the Jewish community in Eastern Europe and particularly Russia was very, very real. The pogroms were catastrophic for the Jewish community. So it was the idea of these rabbis in the 19th century to set up clubs and study groups, etc., where the teachings of Zionism and the teachings of this idea of a return to the Holy Land to escape persecution really starts to take hold. The Tsar was no lover of the Jewish community, believe me. And so what happens is that groups of young Russian Jews start to make what's called aliyah. And aliyah is simply the Hebrew word for going up, which in this instance means going up to Jerusalem in honor of the prayer at Passover next year in Jerusalem. Okay? So they go, and the first group gets there, and what do you suppose they find? The land is not what?
Vacant.
Empty.
The land is not empty. The land is not vacant. There's other Jewish people who practice Judaism a little bit differently. Christians and Muslims all living there. And this was a little bit of a surprise because nobody warned them. You're going to run into a whole lot of other people.
Yeah, imagine that.
Imagine that. They spoke Arabic, a language that the early immigrants did not understand. It was harsh. The land was hard to make a living, and many of them returned home. So the first Aliyah was not particularly successful. Others will be, because the persecution of the Jewish community doesn't change. And so that over time, you get more and more people looking to escape. And enter this man here. He's kind of the father of modern Zionism. His name is Theodor Herzl. Interestingly enough, he's German. He's a German Jew. And the Zionist movement actually arose in Germany. The first Jewish Congress, the first Zionist Jewish Congress, was held in Basel, Switzerland, which is probably not a big surprise. But at any rate, and with the second Aliyah, the answer of Herzl, so Herzl writes a book called The Jewish State. It's very good. It's not a difficult read. You can find it like for free on Gutenberg Books or something. It's an interesting read. And he looks around and thinks, where can we go? And, well, maybe Argentina. The Argentine government was not super excited about that. So he turns to the Torah, and he is reminded of the prayer at Passover and decides we're going to make a second Aliyah starting in 1905, and we're going to set up these collective farms called kibbutz. The kibbutz is it's a collective farm. Everybody does everything. It's kind of mini communism. But I mean, there's like 40 people living there. It works pretty well. And they start to, and the kibbutz movement becomes a way way for the Jewish community to live and prosper and have community, and yet their neighbors are very concerned about dispossession. And they're very worried about colonization, and they see this movement of Europeans coming to the area. And again, when I say Arabs, it's so important at this time to keep in mind it means Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It does not just mean Muslims.
So all Zionists are Jews, but
Yeah.
not all Jews are Zionists?
That is correct. And then there's this very odd movement of Christian Zionism. I don't know if any of you have heard of Christian Zionism. It's an evangelical movement that wants to rebuild the temple, and the majority of the Jewish community in Jerusalem is like, no, thank you, because that ushers in the end times. I know. But yes, all Zionists are Jews, but not all Jews are Zionists. Yeah, Zionists. The kibbutz movement that starts in the early part of the 20th century morphs into what we know today as the settler movement.
That's the what?
The settler movement. All the settlers that have sort of, well, that's a conversation for the next time, that have ushered in all kinds of sort of problems. So, you know, we return, as we so often do when I get the privilege of being here talking to you, with these equally important narratives. It's about persecution, but it's also about people who live there. It's about the Europeans. Who do we like? Who do we favor? Because, you know, okay, yeah, all right, so here we go. So, oh, this is one. Okay, these are British tourists at the top of the pyramids. That's when you could climb the pyramids.
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
They're drinking tea in their bathing suits. The local Egyptians are having a fit. Because, I mean, they cover up. They don't run around half-dressed. Men or women. I know, a student sent me that picture, and it remains. And then, of course, there they are on camels, and I can't be too critical of that picture because I have a picture of me with Mike riding the camels at the pyramid, so I have to shut up. So if we go back to sort of the Civil War and to Britain, what happens by 1876 or so is that Britain controls 50% of Egypt's assets and revenues. 50%. And they restrict how much education the local Egyptian population can have, and what positions they can serve in the government. And probably the most famous governor of Egypt is a man named Evelyn Cromer, who I think is on the next slide. Nope, he's not. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, and you know, I wasn't going to include this until the situation that's going on right now, and I thought, oh, I better probably say something. At the time, it was called Mount Lebanon. Maronite Christians, Muslims, and Druze. Druze is a sect of Shiism, of Shia Islam, that is very, very, very secretive. It's hard to know too much about them if you're not born into it. But they live up in the Golan Heights. So they live in that region that borders Lebanon and Syria, and they have forever. They have lived there forever. And there are even some Druze that serve in the IDF. So that's kind of interesting. And so what happens is that the local communities of Muslims and Druze feel very strongly that they are being disenfranchised or treated, you know, not as well as the Christians. Because what happens is, to encourage the Christian communities to prosper, France gets involved and makes it a sort of a going concern or a mini, and they put down the British, you know, or not the British, the French, forcibly put down disputes among these communities. So rather than make them work it out and say, we're going to take a big step back and let you work out your situation, France intervenes. So that's and so if you look at pictures of Beirut, it looks like Paris. It was a tourist destination for the longest time, and fun fact, coach of the Golden State Warriors, Steve Kerr, he was born there.
Oh,
Oh, my
His
goodness.
father, Malcolm Kerr, was the president of the American University in Beirut. He was murdered by Hezbollah
oh.
in his office. So if you ever watched Steve Kerr interview and coach, there's something different about the way he does things, and that's why. Born and raised in London. Still has friends there. Through elementary school. Yeah. That's your fun trivia fact for the day. Okay, so, and then at the very start, we're 14 years from World War I, what happens? The discovery of the potential for oil. A British company in 1901 founded the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and in 1908, this man right here, William Knox Darcy, made the first discovery of oil. What's going to happen, my people? What's going to happen? Yep. Absolutely. By 1914, thousands of barrels of oil were being piped out of the region, and the revenue was going to the British. I do believe that at one point, the statistic was 20% stayed in Iran. 20%.
How generous.
Pardon?
How generous.
I know, right? And we wonder why there's a lot of tension. And then, of course, oil is found in the Saudi desert, and on it goes. And that becomes yet another reason for the forces of Europe to be involved. Now, the United States, we don't come to the party until towards the end of World War I, which is next time. So, you know, in the best, so my students, in the best tradition of Scheherazade, we end the story with a little cliffhanger. The United States, we're just looking. We're not doing a whole lot yet. Don't worry, our day will come. And so that is Caesarea. That's the Roman ruins at Caesarea, just outside of Tel Aviv. That's the Roman part. On this side here, you can dive. If you're a scuba diver, they do archaeological underwater tours. I can't scuba because I blew out both of my eardrums, but I know people who have, and they'll take you down to see what has been buried by the Mediterranean. I know. I'll go out on the boat. So what we have here is a picture of a Middle East being acted upon. And I would argue the ever-increasing agency or power of the people is increasingly being eroded. And as much as people very much tried to continue their lives, it was not just a physical occupation. Westernizing ideas were seeping into the area because the leaders were being educated where? In England and in France, absolutely. So all of these ideas that are in some ways antithetical to the people that live there are coming. So it's not just imperialism by force. It's by culture. It's by economics. It's all of these forces sort of acting on them. And then we get the steady march towards war. And that's the cliffhanger. We end with World War I. To counter, the Ottoman Turks decide to cast their lot with Germany. So as we get towards World War I, they are increasingly tied to Germany. And that, in fact, will enter the war, World War I, on the side of Germany, which is going to send the rest of the Allied powers into a state of hysteria. To counter this, the British in particular sought alliances with the Arab leaders in the Hejaz, in that region of the desert. And we're going to find out about that. It's called the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence. It's a huge problem in the middle of World War I. And initially, they didn't want to plot against the Ottoman Empire. Why would you not want to plot against the Ottoman Empire? Because in fact, what are they, for good or ill, what are they doing?
Keeping peace.
Exactly, they're keeping the peace. But then, you know, oh, I'm reviewing the situation because of their ties to Germany. And that the main concern, of course, again, was the safety and security of the Suez Canal. France, their goals were less clear. As long as they got a share of, when it started to look like the Ottoman Empire was going to collapse, as long as France got a share of whatever it was that's left, you know, in that little breakup, and they could be seen as the heroes of the Maronite Christians of Lebanon, they're good. This is St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai. You can see it here. It's still a monastery. Like, you can go there. The nunnies have been there since, like, the 3rd century. I know. You can't really hang out with the nuns, but you can stay there. Because they're around, but they kind of stay. They're kind of cloistered. But you can, you know, you can go there. It's super cool. I don't advise it in the summertime. Oh, and you know how we have Smokey the Bear? The Smokey the Bear of the National Park Service in Israel is the ibex. So that's what that is. That's an ibex. And they have the same little signs. Don't smoke, the ibex don't like it. And it's somebody ibex is the Smokey the Bear. This is fantastic. So in 1914, the Ottoman Empire enters World War I on the German side, and what happens, of course, is that the Ottoman Empire completely collapses. It is completely collapsed by 1918, and the Ottoman world is partitioned primarily between Britain and France. Primarily between Britain and France. With the local people thinking all this time, great, the Ottomans, we've thrown off the yoke of the Ottomans. We're free of colonial intervention. Ding, thanks for playing. Oh, and that's it. And I feel like this is a dash, so I reserved some extra time for questions because I just feel like this was such a dash and I overwhelmed you. I hope I didn't no, you're very smart people, I didn't overwhelm you.
Yeah, I have a,
Yes,
so the local people, you know, weren't involved with when Britain and France were fighting over territory, but the local people also weren't organized in a way, were they? To where they had some kind of agency to be able to say, this is what we would want?
that's a great question. Their organization looked different than ours. They're predominantly tribal. In the Hijaz, certainly, in the Sharif of Mecca, he was a force because he controlled the 2 holiest sites in Islam, right? So they were nominally well organized. But if these are tribal communities, they're Bedouin, they have a nomadic tradition, so that what looked to the Europeans like chaos, it looked to the Europeans like chaos. And yes,
But the bottom line is they were vulnerable.
they were
because of
vulnerable.
that.
That's the word I'm looking for, Margie. Thank you. You are absolutely right. They were vulnerable. The Israelis, then I'll get to you, Naomi. The Israelis decided that the answer to deal with their Bedouin community, just down about 6 or 7 miles from Jerusalem going down to the Dead Sea, was to build houses for them.
Oh, dear.
This is hilarious. So you drive down and you kind of, you're driving to the Dead Sea and you look to the left and there's all these houses and Bedouin tents next to them. Because they moved on to the land and they put up their tents and they continued to live and the houses just sit there. They're like, great, thanks for the land, we're not going to live in the houses. So yeah, vulnerable, right? This did not make any sense. Yes, okay, great, right? Fantastic, yeah.
I was thinking of the immigration from Germany into the United States. It must have also been into this part of the world as part of the people's response to the unrest in Europe.
Yeah.
Because that would have been, 1885 to 1915, somewhere in there. And so these people are thinking this is available space. The immigrations from Europe think, we'll just go have some.
Right. The mantra was a land without people for people without a land.
The way we did in the American West.
Correct. The land of Palestine is empty.
So then
Tell
in
the
the
500,000 people
American,
that live there.
in
Yeah.
the American West, we had lots of fighting and mayhem between the indigenous people and the settlers. Did that happen?
No, it didn't. They didn't have the, as Margie so rightly pointed out, they did not have the capacity to fight like that. It's not gonna be until later, till after World War I, and the support of the Europeans to give certain groups weapons, and particularly after 48, that people start armed struggle. But that's not their tradition. Their tradition was not to go at each other with with swords and guns. There's a diarist, I think I mentioned him, in Jerusalem in the 19th century, and he wrote longingly about, when you get to World War I, how his community of Jerusalem used to be a place where everybody celebrated traditions and holidays and got along about as well as people that are different get along and have their disagreements, but could sit down and talk about it. So that their tradition was not to go after each other. That's a post-World War I phenomenon that I am going to talk about next time. I'm not saying everybody was singing Kumbaya. Please do not say, no. But I'm just saying, it doesn't look like it did today. This would be unrecognizable to, like, Wasif Jawahiri, who wrote the diary. This would be unrecognizable to him.
I have another question. Last time you talked about the Sumerians.
Yes.
And you said that they were, only honoring the first 5 books, the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I read, and I just don't know, this is for clarification, that Sumerians also intermarried with Gentiles?
Some of them did.
Okay.
Yes, they did. They do less of that now because they feel that their community is under siege.
Where is their community?
They have 2 main communities, and one of them is Mount Gerizim. So if you go to Nablus, which is in the present-day West Bank, there's a kind of a hilltop community, Mount Gerizim. And I know the high priest there. And that's where many of them live. And then there's a smaller community, I believe it's just outside of Hebron. But the main community is at Mount Gerizim, just above Nablus.
Right, but maybe in Jesus' time?
Mm-hmm. They did.
They did intermarry.
They did, absolutely. They weren't so concerned about losing their traditions, yeah. That's a great point, thank you. Got 10 minutes, man. Ask away. I mean, I can keep yakking, but it doesn't seem like a very good idea. You seriously have no questions? I can do the current situation. No?
We don't have the rest of the day.
No, you don't. We'd be here until next semester. Yeah, as you know, the majority of the fighting right now is going on between Israel and Hezbollah, with Lebanon caught. With Lebanon caught in the middle. There's still 100-some hostages. People seem to have forgotten about them.
You believe many of them are still alive?
No?
Neither.
I'm not optimistic. I think some are, but I don't think, no, I don't. And I think that when, with all due respect to the Israelis, when they decided to take out Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, he directly put the lives of the hostages in jeopardy. That was a bad decision. But when you're under indictment and you're not prime minister anymore, you make bad decisions. Yes. Well, that. I feel bad not keeping you the whole time, but.
Thanks for the treats.
Oh no! Okay, so next time we're going to do 1914 to 1948-ish, maybe. Actually, 1914 all the way up to the start of the '67 war.
Are we gonna get college credit for this?
You should. I think you should. And have some more treats because there's lots.
Only if we pass the test.
There's going to be a map quiz at the end.
Yeah, man.